So I just wanted to take 30 seconds of a moment of silence to acknowledge all sexual assault victims or survivors, because it's one of the hardest things to go through. So. And thank you guys. Thank you for that. Okay, so I just wanted to touch base on our agenda for today. We'll be covering we will be covering types of abuse, understanding trauma, sexual abuse, prevention, and taking action. And for the participants, this presentation was developed by a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, and organization members who are survivors themselves. To make this space more accessible, we'll be recording only the slides. We will only be recording the slides and the presenters. The participants, you should be automatically no camera. If you would like to change your name, you're more than welcome to. A respectable name or alias or anything of that sort, please feel free to. After the presentation is over, we'll be doing like a group activity, a group Jeopardy activity, which is fun. A group Jeopardy activity with a chance to win prizes. We have gift cards for prizes, and I think the Jeopardy game is kind of dope, you know. But at that point, all recording will stop. Once we start playing the Jeopardy game, there'll be no more recording. Everyone can feel free to use their microphones when participating, and I will explain further instructions on that towards the end. But we will be sending out the slides of this presentation that we're having today, and the recording afterwards in an email along with the feedback. We would love to have your feedback, and along with the resources that came with this presentation today. We also ask that everyone remains on mute during the presentation. For questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the comment box. We do have a few of It's My Movement members who are here watching today, who are watching the chat right now, including myself. I love to speak back, you know. So for questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the comment box. We will be leaving an unrecorded time at the end for anyone to ask questions over the mic if you like. Soon as we, stop, I will let everyone know once we stop recording. You can ask any questions that you would like and engage. Please keep the chat as a respectable space. Please, as a respectable space. And we just quickly want to give a content warning that a lot of this content is very heavy. Harm does not exist in the abstract. Harm and trauma are all things people have personal experiences with, and we'll all be talking about sexual assault, prevention, teen dating, sex education as it relates to trauma. Please take care of yourself. Please take care of yourself, and please take a break if needed. If at any point you need to step away and take a little breather, if we're hitting some triggers, just know that the recording will be there. A break is not only welcome, but it's very much encouraged. So we would like to hear more, We would like to hear more of what you think about this training. If you are going to be sharing anything on social media, please use our handles and hashtag on Instagram, Facebook. It's My Movement all over. We use the hashtag IMM or hashtag It's a Movement because this really is a movement, and in a few seconds you will really get to see why and how we have come to become this movement. And yeah, we also have an introduction about It's My Movement, just to tell you a little bit about our story before I get to let you guys know who I am. And if you don't already know, let's let you guys know who I am, our mission, and then we will get into our presenters, and then our game, and all engagements.
The movement was started through my own healing from being a sexual abuse survivor. Then a repeated trauma happened to one of my family members, and that was the only confirmation I needed to form an organization for breaking the cycle of sexual abuse, especially in families. I questioned what would I do differently in my own trauma, and realized the answer is to speak up and be heard. Unfortunately for me, my family didn't hear me, so with It's My Movement, I decided to listen to the hearts of children who live their life terrified by monsters in and outside of their home. When a child hears It's My Movement, I want it to become an eternal affirmation. The movement is a term used to amplify a sense of safety and protection to their innocence. It's My Movement aspired to do many things in time, but now the focus is to educate, empower, and motivate youth and families to break the cycle of sexual abuse.
Our story. So I just want to thank everybody again who is joining right now. Well, they can't just jump in. So everyone who's already here, welcome. I'm so used to doing Facebook Lives. Welcome. And I am Camilla Williams. I'm the founder and executive director of It's My Movement. And our mission is to break the cycle of youth and families victimized by sexual abuse by empowering them with education and support services. And I have yapped my gums enough. It is time to get to the fun part. And our presenters today will be Alethea Wilson Small. She is a licensed professional counselor. She is also the owner and operator of Counseling on the Hill. We also have Stephanie Musto. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She is also an It's My Movement member and board member. We also have Amira Jenna. She's a poet, she's an author, she's a creator, and she is also a board member. And I just want to welcome everybody who has joined us today. We also have other board members that's sitting with us today. Thank you guys for sitting with us. And our first presenter will be Alethea, and she'll be touching on trauma and everything like that. So let me mute myself.
Well, first, let us get together. Thank you. First, I would like to say, Camilla, for having me here. I want us to be able to focus on the abuse and trauma and exactly the overall effects of it. If we can go to the next slide. What we're going to be covering is a broad understanding about sexual abuse, the prevention, and some strategies that we can take in order for us to take action. The first thing I want us to also look at is the different types of abuse. We have several types of abuse here. We have the physical, right? And what is the physical child abuse? What is that aspect? And that's when something physically is being done to a child. It's intentional harm that's being done, whether it's hitting, kicking, shaking, or burning. It's a physical harm that's being conducted to the child. And then we have the sexual child abuse. Sexual child abuse, what is that, right? Sexual child abuse is when a child is actually being abused sexually. Someone has actually used a child to satisfy their own sexual gratification or needs. Emotional child abuse, that is the pattern, that's the behavior, something that's going, a hurtful thing that's affecting a child's emotional development, so, their sense of being, something that will last with them for a lifetime. Child neglect. We hear about this all the time when we think about child abuse, right? We hear about the neglect, whether it's schooling, whether it's shelter, whether it's food. These are the necessities that a child needs in order to thrive, right? These things are not being provided for. Interpersonal violence. Now, this can be done to a child or anybody, right? Interpersonal violence, that's when this is intentional harm that's being done to someone, right? It doesn't matter whether it's domestic, physical, it's just physical and intent harm being done. Community violence, and I really thrive on this one because community violence is so serious, especially with everything that's happening today in our society. Community violence, when a child is involved, this is the child that's going to the playground, swinging on the swings, and someone is looking out to hurt someone else, but next thing you know, the child is caught in the crossfire. This is that community violence. Community violence doesn't necessarily have to just happen to a child. It can happen to anyone, but still, when we're talking about child abuse, that's a form of abuse. Community violence that affects our children. Intimate partner violence, and this is just violence that happens in a relationship. Whether it's physical, emotional, these are intentional harms that are happening in a relationship, causing abuse. And then there's bullying. And bullying, of course, we know, we hear about it all the time. It happens in the schools all the time. And this is repeated negative acts that are being done towards a child. It could be done from a group or it could be done just by a single child. But these things cause an emotional downfall on our children, causing trauma to exist. And with all of these abuse that happens that we just talked about, these abuse all lead up to trauma and shock and stress. Let's look at some of the trauma and some of the responses and the reactions that occur when trauma is happening, right? We have the physical reactions, cognitive reactions, emotional reactions, and behavioral reactions. So what are some physical reactions that stem from trauma, abuse, and shock? We have the fatigue, that's physical, difficulty sleeping, insomnia, nightmares, night terrors, sleep disturbances, right? Lack of an appetite. The child can start developing digestive issues, even nausea, actually feeling sick to their stomach. And then we have the cognitive reaction or responses, right? Those things that affect a child, right? In the brain, right? The cognitive reaction, that's the inability to focus and concentrate. They find it difficult to even keep their mind on what they need to keep their minds on. Some children and anyone tend to have like those flashbacks as if they're reliving the situation all over again. They just can't seem to get it out of their heads. And then they start experiencing some form of indecisiveness, not really knowing how to make rational and reasonable choices, right? They're just clouded, right? Then they become forgetful. They start to forget things, not really knowing what to do, what to say, and forgetting what was told to them, sometimes forgetting about the event itself, right? Then they have confusion, just again, that mind mind fog, totally oblivious and confused about certain things. And then the lack of critical thinking, not able to make good choices and decisions for themselves. And then we can look at the emotional reactions, right? That's that fear and the guilt. Start feeling a sense of numbness, not even knowing where they are, right? Becoming oversensitive or irritable, right? Just always on edge, anxious. Then they can start forming some form of depression, then anger sets in and frustration. All reasonable, right? Reasonable emotions. And then behavioral reactions. This is sort of like a change in activity, no longer interested in the things that they used to do. Their communication changes, become withdrawn, really not having too much to say. Emotional burnout, right? Just totally not there anymore. Okay, and with all of these reactions, it affects the brain. So I want us to be able to see what trauma and shock and child abuse can actually do to the brain, right? And if we look at this picture here, we can see the picture of the normal brain, and we can see a picture, an artist's illustration of the abused brain. If you look at the normal brain, you see that it's functioning and it's looking like it's really active. But look at that abused brain, and it's sort of withdrawn, not too much activity actually going. And I like to use this artist's conception about flip your lid. Okay, when a person is having a normal brain functioning, that fist is completely shut and it's engaged. That prefrontal cortex, the ability where you can remain calm, you're able to make rational decisions, all of that is intact, right? But once that abused brain is affected, that's when the amygdala is engaged. The cortisol is now released in the brain. And that's when the fist is now relaxed. And it's really totally discombobulated. It causes the child difficulty to function, difficulty to make decisions, difficulty to calm down, right? So it really sends the child in a disarray. And I want us to be able to take a brief moment to look at the positive, tolerable, and toxic stress illustration. This goes to show you a little bit how trauma and sexual abuse and stress are all related.
We have all experienced some sort of stress as children. Maybe it was a test you didn't study for, or moving schools and finding new friends. Regardless, it's important to keep in mind that a little bit of stress from time to time is healthy. It helps us grow and understand how to overcome problems we may face. However, when the stress response is triggered too many times, there can be lasting effects on the brain that carry on to adulthood. Stress plays a prominent role in the development of a child. The three types of stress include positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Positive stress will show as an increase in heart rate and an elevation in stress hormones. It is short-lived and is triggered during minor stress experiences, such as taking a shot or being left in a daycare for the first time. However, with supportive adults to help them cope, children will gradually learn how to problem solve and deal with adversity, leading to the development of a healthy stress response system. Tolerable stress can be more serious. Perhaps you've lost a loved one or experienced a natural disaster. These types of situations can have potential for extreme damage on the brain, but with encouraging relationships, it will mend over time. However, things can get serious when the stress response gets triggered too many times. This threat is known as toxic stress. It is strong, frequent, and prolonged for a long period of time. The root of toxic stress can be numerous things, such as abuse, neglect, or violence. This type of stress will physically affect the brain, leaving certain parts rewired and changed. Toxic stress disrupts the development of brain structure and other organ systems, and it can even increase the risk for stress-related disease well into the adult years. The worse the experience in childhood, the greater the effects will be in adulthood. Toxic stress causes permanent damage on the brain, focusing on the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex, also known as the ACC. The amygdala, also known as the fear center, detects dangerous things in the surrounding area and tells the body to act. but it can become overactivated due to toxic stress. In other words, your amygdala is always telling your body that you are in danger, resulting in chronic stress, where one feels unsafe, fearful, and irritated. Furthermore, victims will often overreact to minor triggers because trauma sensitizes one's amygdala, meaning that fear responses are triggered by lower levels of stress. The prefrontal cortex, or the thinking center, regulates the stress response system by making things seem less scary than they really are. Outside of stress, it helps regulate our emotion and memory, as well as sensory processing, which allows us to effectively use our body in certain events, such as learning and problem solving. However, trauma causes the prefrontal cortex to become underactivated. Consequences of a damaged prefrontal cortex include difficulties with concentration, attention, and learning. This is because when we are under stress, cortisol is released from the adrenal glands on our kidneys. Cortisol is a hormone that increases heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and muscle tension to prepare us to fight or run away, otherwise known as the fight or flight reaction. High levels of cortisol impair one's ability to think rationally or logically. So when our body is always thinking it is in danger, there will be constant high levels of cortisol in our body, affecting our ability to concentrate and learn. Connected to the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex is also one of the structures damaged from toxic stress. Known as the emotion regulation center, it controls the affect regulation, the ability to control and manage uncomfortable emotions during a stressful moment. A damaged anterior cingulate cortex results in difficulties with regulating emotions. For example, if someone gets pranked, they could remain scared long after the joke ends. Childhood trauma can cause many psychological issues, such as PTSD, high stress levels, and depression. However, these problems can be solved with patience, love, and care. Research indicates that supportive, responsive relationships with caring adults as early in life as possible can help prevent or reverse the damaging effects of toxic stress. One of the safest ways to solve one's trauma is over time. It's a good idea to build confidence progressively and work towards a goal in which one can feel safe again. In addition, patient and loving adults can help relieve toxic stress, as these relationships will help build trust and a sense of community within the child, resulting in them eventually learning how to overcome their trauma. Recovering can be a long and difficult journey, but with enough patience, support, and care, one can finally be free of that burden.
Awesome, thank you. And so we can see how stress, toxic stress, can definitely play a major role in a child's life or anyone's life, right? So what I want us to be able to look at now is an effective treatment. And one of the effective treatments that I wanted to be able to share this evening, and especially for parents when it comes to children, is I believe firmly in an intervention called DROPS. Not an evidence-based, but it is an intervention that is used specifically for families who've gone through trauma. And the D stands for developmentally and culturally sensitive. And what that means is parents need to understand that this, child abuse isn't something that happens, just to the African American community, Caucasian community. This is something that we all have to understand, that it happens in all cultures, right? And we have to understand this affects them development, this affects their development, through a lifespan. Then there's the resilient based over deficit based. What this means, parents need to dig deep inside and become resilient. Stop being withdrawn, be willing to be involved, stop the old, how can I say it, back in the day, home remedies. What happens in the home stays in the home. It cannot. It cannot. You have to be resilient and you have to go forward and speak the truth of what has occurred. Don't shy. Don't be shy. Overcoming avoidance by encouraging your child to talk instead of waiting for them to be ready. They're never ready. You have to ask questions. You have to investigate. They're not going to just be comfortable and say what happened. They're afraid. They're looking to protect. And statistics prove that normally child abuse is happening. The predator is someone that's close. They're not going to want to talk about it. So you have to draw it out of them. Parent inclusion, be involved. Know that, if you're going for a sleepover, who are you going with? How long do you know them? We have so many teen parents today, and I understand teens want to still be teens, go out and have a good time, but realize when you bring a child into this world, you now have to change. You're responsible now. You're responsible. So you need to protect that child, even though some are still children themselves. Then we have skills and safety focused to improve functioning in areas that are problematic, like in the schools, sleep, effective regulation. We just touched on that, effective regulation. Get involved, get the skills that you need to know how to fight back. Get involved, like the movement, IMM, right? Get involved with organizations that are there to help. Reach out, ask for it. We won't know until you do. Thank you. Also, sorry, I just want to share. We have a slide in regards to mandating reporting. Anyone that works for an agency, we have to report it. Even parents, if you're a neighbor, mandated reporter, report it. Here's the number. Don't be afraid. It is not your responsibility to say whether a person did it or not. All you have to do is suspect and think that it's happening. Let the other agencies who you're reporting to do their job by doing the investigation. If you suspect it, report it, whether it's happening or not. Let them do the investigation, but always do what you need to do to protect the child. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Alethea, for that valuable breakdown on trauma. And again, my name is Stephanie Musto, and it's really a pleasure being here with everybody tonight. So thank you for taking the time out to do that.
Thank you, Steph.
All right, so we're going to actually build on that information that Alethea shared and really hone in on sexual abuse, focusing on the social, emotional, psychological impacts around it in regards to statistics, stigma, and victims' feelings. I'm going to read this quote out loud. Child sexual abuse is not an isolated problem. It affects each of us, and it's only through each of us that child sexual abuse can be prevented. And a big first step in making an impact and truly preventing sexual abuse is understanding what it is and building language around it. The first action in prevention and seeing any lasting impacts really does start with us here today having this conversation and bringing this knowledge and understanding into our community and into our personal lives. Child sexual abuse occurs when a person uses his or her power over a child or youth and involves the child in any sexual act. And the key word really here is power, that power dynamic. It can be in many different forms, such as age difference, like an uncle and a child, or an older and a younger sibling. It could be an intellectual or a physical development. So maybe developmental delays, or physically somebody who's a different size as somebody else. It could be a relationship of authority over that child. So a parent, for instance, and the child's dependency over them. So if they're their caretaker. And when we think about power or someone who has that power over somebody, there's that imbalance there. And what it does to that victim is it silences them as a result. It takes their power away. And any type of intimidating behavior or bullying behavior or abusive behavior typically meets criteria of a pattern of manipulation and that imbalance of power. Even if it only happens once or it happens over a series of times. Moving on to some statistics. Child sexual abuse happens in every community, regardless of race or economic status. It's a misinformed thought that child sexual abuse only happens in communities with less resources or more impoverished areas. That's actually not the case. The prevalence of child sexual abuse is difficult to determine because it's often not reported. And as we go into these slides, we're going to cover some of those social impacts that might prevent survivors from feeling ready or comfortable to report. The next one is 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys are victims of sexual abuse. I'm going to say that one more time. 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys. And it's a staggering number for girls, and a reminder for us that boys do need to be included in this conversation too. Over the course of their lifetime, 28% of US youth ages 14 to 17 have been sexually victimized. 95% of the time, 3 out of 4 adolescents report that the perpetrator is someone known and trusted by the family. And there's this idea that sexual predators are strangers, or this assumption that home equals safe or family equals safe. And, that's sadly not always the case. And the statistics show that. And often people or in their life, they have trusting relationships with these perpetrators. And trust is really a key word here, and a big component in the kind of harm and trauma that's intertwined with experiencing a sexual assault experience. Self-report studies show that 20% of adult females and 5 to 10% of adult males recall a child sexual assault or sexual abuse incident. And the last one is there are often no outward signs of sexual abuse. And there might not be signs that you can see. You might sense something, there might be something going on. Somebody could come off as distressed or irritable or distant. There could be physical marks in some instances, but in terms of specifically sexual abuse, we can't really know someone's experiencing that in their personal life. And that's why it's important that we build that language and that understanding around these concepts to normalize these conversations with ourselves and with our youth about boundaries and consent in our bodies. And here's where we're going to dive more into those social impacts, because there's a really big social component tied with sexual assault itself and the act of speaking up. And this idea of stigma and stereotypes are important concepts, to reflect on. And also understanding how it plays a large role in contributing to the violence itself and delayed action that survivors experience. And, naturally as humans, we have this need to box things up and compartmentalize things to make life more manageable. Like this goes over here, or based on my experience, when somebody acts like A, this means B. And that's not a way that it's a very natural part of our human nature, how we manage a lot of information and we get through our day-to-day lives. And we put things in a box, and that's okay sometimes, and we can admit that that's collectively what we do. But it's also important to know that we are critical thinkers, and we have the smarts to question those stereotypes and those assumptions we make, and asking ourselves, why are we assuming this? Where does that thought come from? Is that really the best way to assume or the best way to think? And stigma is the definition of it is a mark of disgrace that sets a person apart from others. When a person is labeled an experience, in this case, they are no longer seen as an individual, but as part of a stereotyped group. So I really want to encourage people to go back to the basics and the fundamentals of the truth of people, to really critically think and challenge breaking stereotypes. I think it would be hard to argue some of these basic ideas that every person deserves to be and feel safe, that each individual is unique, every person's story is different, we are all deserving of love, and all people have a spectrum of emotions. And to Alethea's point on trauma from before, it's important to note that 2 people can experience the same significant event in their life and have very different emotional responses. One person could have a very difficult time, they could be traumatized, they could be dealing with social, emotional, psychological outcomes due to that particular event. And the other person could fall down, dust themselves off, and it's not as big of an impact on their lives. And then there's everything in between. So just something to think about. And I really want to ask the group here, if people have a moment and they're tuned in, what assumptions or stereotypes did you learn growing up? And it could be related to sexual assault, or it could be just something about genders or race or culture. I'll give people a moment if anybody wants to type in the comment box. So some that common thoughts could be girls are more concerned about their physical appearance. Gender stereotyping men are stronger and do all the work. Or all people who live in England have bad teeth, a cultural stereotype. There's lots of those in our lives, and those are just a couple of examples.
Tiffany says, or is the victim's fault?
Absolutely, that's a great
fault.
Thank you, Tiffany. And to relate it back to sexual abuse, and that was a really good example, Tiff. Sexual abuse is surrounded by silence, fueled by societal myths and stereotypes, such as only strangers abuse children, which we learned before is not the case. Parents do not abuse their own children. Boys do not get abused. Women never abuse. Children don't abuse other children. Many times, children do not tell anyone about their abusive experiences due to that fear of being punished, stigmatized, and isolated. And just to focus a little bit more on stereotypical gender roles and how that does play a part in not reporting. Some examples are boys who are abused sometimes do not perceive it as abuse, since that stereotype and notion of masculinity teaches boys to enjoy sexual activity. Or boys who are abused by other men may fear that others will think that they are gay, and that's how homophobia and stereotypes around that plays a really big part. Girls have to deal with the stereotype of feminine purity. They feel pressure not to disclose because sometimes they think that their purity has been taken away because of that abuse. And in some cultures, girls are rejected from their families if they report being sexually abused. In other cultures, girls may be forced to marry the man who abused them. So we're going to watch a quick video. Again, stereotypes are harmful. They take away from a person's story and identity. I'm sorry, this isn't working. I'm going to move on. So to move on, what might keep a child or youth from not telling or not reporting? Every individual reacts differently to sexual abuse, regardless of the type, the extent, or duration of the abuse. And there are many reasons that a child may not tell about the abuse. And so in the next slides, we're going to go over a few examples why. Fear. Children who have been threatened may believe that the threats will be carried out if they tell. Example could be a disclosure will result in a breakup of their family. The child may be afraid of rejection, upset, or other negative reactions, either by family, friends, or in some cases, even that alleged offender. The child may also fear that people will treat them differently if they know about the abuse. The second one is confused and conflicted feelings. The child may be confused when he or she has been abused by someone trusted, leaving feelings of anger, betrayal, or deep sadness, asking themselves, why would somebody who loves me do something like this? The child may feel confused because they love or care about the abuser, or the pressure of being loyal to that abuser. And it can be really confusing to understand if the child's body responds to the abuse. The third one is self-blame and guilt. The child may think that they deserve the sexual abuse because they wanted love, attention, or accepted presents or treats from the alleged offender. Some children feel guilty because they did not try to stop the abuse, while others feel guilty because they did try to stop it, but the abuse still happened. Some children who were abused multiple times might feel guilty because they did not tell about the abuse after it occurred. And the last one is feeling vulnerable and powerless. The child may feel powerless and vulnerable, more at risk, because nothing they did stopped the abuse, or there was no way to stop it. And the child may think that no one has the ability to stop the abuser. Some children are isolated with no one to help or support them, or they feel that there's no one who can protect them or be there to help. And the last part is children are highly dependent on their parents and their caregivers for safety and their well-being and protection. And they might worry that if they say something, that might go away. So just as, again, kind of recap that those components are very, very complex, and they all intertwine with each other. It's never an easy black and white reason why somebody might not report. But again, to go back to that social impact, and to remember that as we learn this information and we bring this into our community and into our personal lives, that in trying to not make assumptions, trying not to assume people or think we know the answers, but to be inquisitive and to ask questions and to have that trauma-informed perspective that we don't know what people are experiencing and everybody is going through their own story, is a really easy principle to kind of carry with us when life kind of gets in the way sometimes. And the last part here is just to kind of note the impacts of mental health. I mean, it's a really complex topic that we could probably spend a whole nother presentation talking about, but this video does recap some of the lasting impacts that child sexual abuse survivors do experience, and statistically what types of mental health disorders can occur due to that experience. I'm really sorry, y'all. I don't know why it's suddenly not working. If you would give me one moment, I would like to show this.
These women all have one thing in common. Each is a survivor of child sexual abuse. They were asked 5 questions, and they agreed to be open and honest about their personal life. Raise your hand if you have suffered from insomnia. Raise your hand if you have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. Raise your hand if you have been addicted to alcohol or drugs. Raise your hand if you have struggled with an eating disorder. Finally, raise your hand if you have attempted suicide. Many survivors deal with significant impacts of their abuse well into adulthood. It's not a coincidence. Healing is possible. Start your journey at uniquefoundation.org.
Thank you. So, again, that trauma piece that was covered in our first portion is a really big component to that because of the lasting effects and what kind of comes after that as people age into their lives, from children to adolescents to adults and further. And just again, I love that hand model, because it really does, remind us that when we're living in that fight, flight, and freeze with this is our amygdala, where our emotional response is, we want to find ways for people to feel safe and feel heard and to understand their triggers so that they can slowly close that lid back up. Not that they won't ever be triggered again or be in an unsafe situation, but how do they build those protective factors so that they do have layers of safety and layers of self, community and building, so that they can feel empowered to be the survivors that they are. So thank you.
Thank you, Steph, for that information, and thank you, Alethea. Both of you gave very invaluable information over the course of this presentation, and thank you, Camilla, for allowing me to be a part of this also. The portion of the presentation that I'm going to be going over with you guys today is prevention and action. Today I'm going to be going over strategies to stay safe and also empowerment for survivors. Child sexual abuse is a serious social problem that affects the quality of life for a high percentage of uncounted survivors in the United States and internationally. Based on data from a 2018 study, it is estimated that 734,630 people, I'm sorry about that, hold on. Is that better?
Keep talking, okay.
Okay. Based on the data on a 2018 study, it is estimated that 734,630 people were raped. That includes threats, attempts, and completions in the United States. Estimates published by WHO, the World Health Organization, indicate that globally about 1 in 3, or 30% of women worldwide have been subjected to either physical and or sexual intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Now, these numbers are based on self-reports, so there are still countless cases that go unreported. While the information I just presented gave only statistics on women and girls, it is important to know and understand that boys and men also suffer sexual violence. But unfortunately, sexual violence against men and boys is a very sensitive and neglected area of study. And I realize these numbers are high, but I do not want us to make the mistake of normalizing this damaging behavior. Child sexual abuse hurts all who are victimized, but it is possible for survivors to cope with, adapt to, and overcome its effects. These are people that surround your lives who understand the damaging impact of child sexual abuse and provide them with the information and support needed to recover and live fulfilling lives. Staying safe. Sexual assault can happen to anyone. So let's talk about ways to stay safe. Consent. Consent should be clearly and freely communicated. Consent cannot be given to an individual, cannot be given by an individual who is underage, intoxicated, or incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, or are asleep or unconscious. So the only safe yes is a sober, age-appropriate, conscious, mentally competent, and non-pressuring yes. Let's talk more about non-pressuring. If you do not want to do something, no one should be attempting to change your mind through guilt, promise, nor harassment. It is completely okay to say no. You do not know anyone an explanation for it. You should not feel bad about your decision. If someone attempts to make you feel bad about your decision, you have the information from them necessary to know that they do not value you and they are a predator. You should distance yourself to prevent possible future harm from this person. I want to add, do not allow anyone to use documentation to justify predatory behavior. This includes scripture, laws, statistics, or historical documents. Do not allow anyone to use your lack of knowledge in these areas to take advantage of you. Let me reiterate that if someone is pressuring you, this is a clear sign that they are a predator. You can avoid predators at parties or events by staying grouped, buying and holding on to your own food and or drink. If you set your drink down or your food down and you walk away from it for any reason, trash it. Leaving your food or drink unattended will give anyone the opportunity to drug you. Keep clear boundaries. If you're uncomfortable around someone, make it known that they cannot enter your personal space and that you prefer not to engage with them in any way. If you find yourself under pressure, remind yourself that it is not your fault and trust your instincts. Always trust your gut. Code words. Create a code word between you and your friends. So if necessary, they can come and help you or you go and help them. Like I said, it is okay to stick with your right to decline pressure. An escape route. Think of an escape route. Familiarize yourself with your surrounding. Exits, windows, security, anyone who can help you, owner of the building, whomever, wherever you can get away, whomever you can get help with. Safety planning when someone is hurting you. If someone is hurting you, there are various options you can get to help you to get the help that you deserve. Make a list of people and places that you feel will help you. If you cannot think of anyone, please feel free to reach out to one of us here at IMM so that we can find you the resources that's needed. Lean on a support network. This can be family, friends, school counselors, teachers, your principal, the person at your after school, anyone that you feel that can help you further. Have an emergency contact saved in your phone. If someone hurts you, report it immediately. Do not be intimidated by threats. Once you are safely away from your attackers, call or go to someone you trust. This is very important to have an emergency contact saved in your phone. Be someone whom you can trust with your life, because this is affecting your entire life. Social media safety. Learn and know how to report, block, and filter content. The cleaner your timeline, the less likely you are to encounter a predator online. Personalize your privacy settings. Be careful who you allow access into your virtual life. Pause before you post. Remember, everyone should not be privy to any information that could lead you to leaving you in a vulnerable situation. If you're telling everyone your every move while you're making them, you're making it easy for them to get to you. This leads me to turning off your geolocation. The only people who should have that type of access to your life are your parents, guardians, and emergency contacts only. Never share your personal information. Never share your personal information. Set boundaries with your friends about public posts. Make privacy a habit by doing regular social media checkup. Don't be afraid to ask your friends to delete a post or picture that reveals your personal information. In the next slide, we're going to watch a short video explaining consent a little bit more.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
What can survivors do to take action in their own life? We're going to start with forgiveness. This is easier said than done, but it can be attained. Forgiveness is not for the abuser, it is for yourself. It will allow you to take your power back and relinquish their control over your thoughts, emotions, and actions. Forgiveness does not mean continuing communication with the abuser, nor does it mean pretending that it did not happen altogether. It means to accept what happened, not blaming yourself and moving on with your life. But like I said, sounds easier than it is, but it can be attained. Self-blame. Do not blame yourself for someone else's behavior. Things that happen out of your control is never your fault. No matter who tries to convince you otherwise, do not allow them to blame you. Therapy. Seek therapy. Therapy is extremely beneficial in the path to healing. Help others. Help another victim or survivor find their voice. You never know how your transparency can inspire bravery in someone else. Support. Surround yourself with people who support your healing process. Trust your journey. Own your own healing process. Everyone's journey is different. You can allow yourself as much time as you need to heal. Confront. You can confront your abuser with support if possible, if this is something that you need to do on your journey to healing. Justice. Seek justice. File a report and go through with the charges and court process. You could be saving someone else from the same fate. Last but not least, never allow what someone has done to you to deplete your ability to grow as a person. You are a beautiful being deserving of an amazing life ahead of you. Walk in your life and own your power. Remember to find the blessings in your life and fill your days with things that you like to do and people that you love. All right, now it's game time. Yay! I'm going to give the floor back to Camilla, and I thank you all for listening.
I think everybody was completely great. I just want to thank everybody again for even just sitting here for the past hour, soaking in all this information. I appreciate everybody who is on right now, who's affiliated with It's My Movement. But as we move on to the fun part, the game for the prizes, all affiliates of It's My Movement are not permitted to play. So there's a first place, second place, third place. There are no teams. I don't know if anybody remember like Jeopardy, whatever, but I will randomly pick questions, and each question is worth a certain point. So if I pick a question that's worth 500 points, then you have 500 points. The points will be given to the first two people who comment in the comment box right now. Actually, I'm actually about to stop the recording.